That's Enough Out of You podcast is sponsored by Todd John's Law. Unfortunately, bad things happen to good people, whether it's the result of an auto accident caused by the carelessness of another driver or being charged with a crime. Dealing with the aftermath of a personal injury accident or being involved with the criminal justice system can be extremely difficult. That's why, whatever you're facing, you should never go it alone. You need an experienced attorney who will stand by you every step of the way. Todd is experienced, licensed, trusted, respected, and guaranteed. No one will work harder or more diligently on your behalf, and he will personally handle your case from beginning to end. Located on Drinker Street in Dunmore, Pennsylvania, Todd has been representing the legal rights of Scranton and Wilkes-Barre personal injury victims and those accused of a crime for over 20 years. At Todd John's Law, the utmost priority is ensuring that your rights are always protected and that your case is resolved as quickly and fairly as possible so that you can move on with your life. Call Todd John's Law at 570-876-6903. With Todd John's Law, you will receive equal justice under the law. All right. Hey there, and welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I'm your host, Bill Rader, and with me, as he is every week, is my co-host, Sean Kane. Sean, what's going on, buddy?
Billy Raids, how you doing today, buddy?
We're doing pretty good. We have a great guest with us today. He is Paul Bleau, and he is returning to the podcast, the second appearance. So, Paul, welcome.
Hey, guys, Bill and Sean, great to be on your show. We had a good time the first time. I'm sure it's going to be fun this time also.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Professor. And you're in Dallas at the conference for the 60th, correct?
Yeah, it's called the Lancer Conference. The co-authors are in Pittsburgh, or they just left Pittsburgh because there's competing conferences, and it's the Cyril Weck Conference that went on. Apparently went really well, and I'm down here at the Lancer Conference in Dallas, making all sorts of connections, learning. I mean, there's just a conveyor belt of speakers,
Nice.
and pretty amazing. And by the way, the last speaker was a 14-year-old guy.
Whoa.
And he just blew everybody's mind with photographic archives that nobody knew about.
Wow.
And it was absolutely amazing.
Wow.
That's impressive.
great.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we thank you for coming on, Paul. We're obviously today we're going to focus on the book that you wrote with Jim DiEugenio and others, called Chokeholds, the chokeholds that inescapably prove there was a conspiracy. So I know, Sean, you got an early copy of the book and you read it and you loved it, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Professor, for sending that early copy. And it's a tremendous book. And I love the name Chokeholds because me and Billy could appreciate that because we're huge pro wrestling fans. So we know what a chokehold is. And I think that was a stroke of genius.
Yes, I'm really happy with that choice. It was a bit controversial because a few of the authors found it to be a little bit violent, and except that it is used, the name chokeholds in contexts outside of wrestling.
Right.
Do you want me to get into why we chose the name? Or?
Yeah, tell us a little bit about who else wrote the book with you, along with Jim, and how the name came about, how you came about with the name Chokeholds, and then we could get into some of them.
Okay, so believe it or not, the only author I knew over a year ago in the whole gang was Jim, because Jim and I have been working together. I mean, we're working together. I've been writing an awful lot of articles for Kennedy's and King, his website, and he's the one who got me into the Oliver Stone documentary, JFK Through the Looking Glass. And so anyway, I was with Jim at Kappa last year during the conference. And one of the authors, a young, bright guy, you'll want him on your show at one point. His name is Matt Crompton, a lawyer out of Ohio. He he was just networking, and he comes to our table and he says, "Hey guys, what do you think of the backyard photos? The ones there that the ones used by Life magazine to portray Oswald as an unhinged communist, where he's carrying both weapons, communist magazines, and so on and so forth." Anyway, the conversation went the way saying, "Well, they look fake to us. They seem to have crop lines along the chin, but to me, it doesn't constitute a chokehold." So they said, "Well, what do you mean by a chokehold?" Chokehold, and we're getting into it. Chokeholds are inescapable. You just can't dispute them.
Right.
And I said, "There's about 10 to 12 of them." And they said, "Well, 10 to 12, what would you imagine was a chokehold? What would you call a chokehold?" And I turned to Jim and I say, "Jim, wouldn't you agree that Oswald, when he was impersonated in Mexico City, and you have Hoover saying the voice on the tape that they had recorded of Oswald there, imitating Oswald, was not Oswald's voice?" And Jim says, "Definitely, that is a chokehold." The word chokehold, the first time I had heard it, came from the famous researcher, the British researcher called Malcolm Blunt. Malcolm Blunt's an amazing researcher, and he used it in reference to how Oswald's CIA file was being managed while he was in Russia as a quote unquote defector. He was really a false defector. But what Malcolm pointed out is that normally a file of that nature, you would open a 201 file, which is sort of a general file on anybody who was of interest. They waited a year to do that. And the second thing they did is they made sure that the file didn't go to the Soviet Russia division. It went to the Office of Security. And that has been interpreted by researchers like John Newman as a way to flush out a mole in the CIA. So Malcolm Blunt called that a chokehold. So what we decided, and we decided to write specifically about 10 chokeholds. Now, the way the authors, to your second question, is how did we come together? Down at Kappa, Mark Adamczyk was there, and he's another lawyer, and another lawyer joined a little later who hadn't been at the conference, a guy called Andrew Eiler, a fellow Canadian. And what they did, the three attorneys, is they always brought the research Jim and I were bringing to the table and their own research to a question of standards of proof. This is amazing because Andrew rightly pointed out that neither the Warren Commission, neither the HSC, they only paid lip service to standards of proof. These are the organizations that were going to say whether Oswald was guilty beyond reasonable doubt.
Right.
But they never handled their investigation and their arguments in that way. On our side, what they continually did with us, and this permeates, I think, Sean, you'll agree, it permeates through the book, right? Is you will see, yes, the research, but you'll see also the legal expertise there saying,
right.
You'll see it in the conclusion of every chapter saying, and the lawyers would say, "You know what? I think this chokehold, we got it. This we would bring to a jury."
Exactly.
And just maybe to finalize on this is each chokehold on its own would convince the reader or the jury that, wait a minute, how do you argue your way out of that one? Mm-hmm. Now, that going back, that to me was really important because I was talking to you at one point about how history books present the Warren Commission, the JFK assassination. And I had done a study 10 years ago on that. And the history books all parrot the Warren Commission conclusion. And when I questioned the authors, because I had done a study on 20 history books or 21, and I questioned the authors said their source was the Warren Commission. They had not evolved to look at at the information that had come out since. I mean, how is that even possible?
That's
That you would
unbelievable.
write a history
Right.
book?
Yeah,
It is unbelievable.
yeah, that's
You're wired into 1964. I mean, it's
such
crazy.
It's
such a failure of academia. We've
Absolutely.
talked about that so many times on our show.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what makes it tragic is the captive audience there are students that are in your
Right.
classroom and they get the book, and that's what
Right.
they read.
Right. Of
Mhm.
course.
And you know, you're there and you say, okay, so everybody, you know, we all we know who coined the term fake news, but now are we getting to the point where in the education system we have to say fake history?
Hmm.
Yeah. Good point.
So
Yeah.
Chokeholds is the ultimate handbook that you can give to a young student who could go and see his teacher and say, hey, well, you're saying that he's a lone nut who drifted in and, you know, so on and so forth. Can you explain to me why he was impersonated? Can you
Yeah.
explain to me why this 24-year-old, why Jack Ruby was given help to get to the basement to assassinate the most important witness in the case?
Right.
And those are, you know, those are some of the points in two different chokeholds that we do. And so when we wrote the book, we had in mind two audiences. One was the general population, and another audience is like the one we have here at Lancer. And I presented to both. And both audiences get a lot out of it. In other words, it's not so sophisticated that if you don't know much about the case, you won't understand what's going on.
Right.
And if you're a seasoned researcher, there's a lot of new stuff in there.
Yes, there is. Absolutely. And you know, like you know, Professor, we have this up on our bookshop, the book, so people could get the link right there. And I recommend it to everybody, and I'm going to be promoting it all over my social media. And you know, I know a young kid I'm going to give it to and just I want so many people to read this book because it's fascinating. And you know, let's get into some of the chokeholds, Professor. But before we do, I have one that I was wondering: would you consider this a chokehold that I didn't see listed? The paraffin tests on Oswald, the negative on his face and his cheek. Wouldn't you consider that a chokehold?
Well, it to me, it could have been an element of proof in a larger chokehold. Okay, so let me explain. Is sometimes you're right. We didn't cover. We you know, we reached 450 pages,
Oh yeah,
and you know, so we couldn't cover everything. But
right.
here's the idea of a chokehold. Okay, so if you take something like the paraffin test on its own, you know, you present it to an audience. Is it clear and convincing? To me, it is, but to maybe the general population, they might say, well, there may have been a reason for that, or he, you know, somehow he wiped it off, but yet he still had some on his hands. I know all that. Sorry. Uh, so here's what constitutes makes a chokehold so powerful, and we'll go into one. Take proof of a front shot. Okay,
Okay.
so proof of a front shot, you can start with look at the Zapruder film, which I did. And I presented it to an audience that hadn't seen you. Believe it or not, at least in Canada, only 1 out of 10 people has seen the Zapruder film. Okay,
Wow.
so
Oh,
probably more in the U.S. have seen it. Yep.
Yeah. That
Okay. So, oh yeah. So
yeah, that's surprising. Actually, I mean, I guess maybe it's not as surprising as you would think, right? I mean, it's actually, Paul, more surprising that, you know, that that Canadians would have much of an interest. I mean, you know, obviously we you know, we share a border. We're obviously very, you know, our countries are very close in culture and a lot of things. But you know, I don't know that our history would be as important to Canadians and you know, and vice versa. So you know, interesting to me that, you know, that you've taken such an interest in this. It really shows the power, I think, that Kennedy had worldwide, you know, not just in our country. But you know,
yeah.
maybe not as surprising that Canadians haven't seen the Zapruder film.
Well, there's a few reasons for that, right? Is back in the day that Kennedy was assassinated, we didn't have cable cable television. So
Sure.
the old timers didn't have as much access to, like, I don't know if they saw, I don't believe they necessarily saw Jack Ruby shoot Oswald live.
Right.
But maybe, so quite a few people didn't have the TV access. So, but I'll tell you one thing. The interest in the case is immense. When Oliver Stone came, and even this year when I presented, we are only packing venues. And what's beautiful is the people who are coming aren't necessarily JFK researchers. It's really, the general population.
Yeah.
But getting back to the chokehold, okay, so the chokehold proof of a front shot relies on the combination of the Zapruder film, of what most witnesses saw,
Right.
of splatter analysis, which is where the guts fly and the blood and everything.
Right.
It flew in a direction opposite of the grassy knoll. That's all factual. You have also, of course, I mean, the craziest thing, I don't even know why there's a discussion about whether there's a conspiracy, when in the archives you have about 40 descriptions and depositions of doctors from both Bethesda and Parkland describing an exit wound in the back of the head.
Right, the back
And
of
you
the
can
head
see
blown
those.
out.
And now we have
Yeah,
this.
so
I'm sorry. And now we have this documentary. I don't know if you're aware. There's a new documentary, Paul,
yeah,
on Paramount Plus with the doctors from Parkland, and of course they're talking about, that what they saw and how they were all certain that the neck wound was an entrance wound.
oh yeah, I think there's some video, and we know also that some of them were really pressured to change their original versions, and that was a guy called Elmer Moore, a Secret Service thug, I would say.
Dog,
That
yeah.
went about saying, "Hey, listen," and people saying, "Hey, look, if you say something," even the autopsy doctors at Bethesda pressured them, say, if you say something that is so irresponsible that there was a front shot, you could lose your practicing license. I mean, that's how far it went.
Unbelievable.
That's unbelievable.
That's
Unbelievable. And, even Berkeley wanted to talk at one point, to Berkeley being Kennedy's physician. And at one point he wanted to talk, backed out. But it's on the record that his lawyer told someone, I think, at the HSCA, that he had information that would indicate that more people had to be involved. But he never got to describe it. So, but the point is, getting back to a chokehold. So say you say there's one chance in 10 or two chances in 10 that Kennedy's head, even though he was fired on from the front or from the back, could have moved backwards for some inexplicable reason. Okay. But if you go and then you say, well, maybe there's an explanation on why splatter went behind the vehicle. And, you try and explain away you just can't. So when the point here is there's something called consilience. Consilience is when, for instance, if you flip a coin, right? And I say, what are the odds of getting tails? You'll say 50-50. What about twice in a row? 1 in 4. But when you say 10 times in a row or 6 times, you'll see that you're going to quickly get into 1 out of 1,000 that something like that can happen. So these are things that you're saying, well, if that chance, that 1 in 10 chance that his head would have gone backwards, and then you start adding it up with the other thing, you get to a point where there's a chokehold. There can be no doubt. So that's why, if getting back to your question about the paraffin test, if you throw it into the context of the other stuff, that's what we did to reach chokehold points. Sometimes you only needed one piece of evidence, but in every chapter we have like corroborating elements of evidence that make it undeniable.
Okay, fair enough. And another proof of the front shot was Kilduff when he says that he actually describes the front shot and points to the front of his forehead.
Definitely. And he's giving raw information right from Parkland Hospital.
Yeah.
He's not being pressured or anything at this point. So that's the information really that is the most reliable, not the stuff that came out weeks later or whatever when a lot of arm twisting was done.
So let's get into some more of the chokeholds, Professor. Let's start with like the official record impeaches the Warren Commission. And
Yeah.
I really want to. There's so much you could go into, but I want to talk about something I don't think we talked about on our podcast. Is the two FBI guys, Siebert and O'Neill, and what they had to say, because that's unbelievable.
That is unbelievable. And that their testimony was kept classified. It was only when the ARB came around, I think, that we got to hear their report. And it was so damning because Siebert and O'Neill were the FBI officers who had a bird's eye view of the autopsy, right? And they're in a chapter. Let's get back to Siebert and O'Neill on what they said, because their two voices are just one out of maybe 100 in that chapter. Here, Sean, is why that chapter was so important for us. And it's something we wanted to do. I asked the audience yesterday at Lancer, I said, if Bugliosi were alive, what would he be calling the people in this room? He said, yeah, everybody says, well, he'd be calling us quacks, right? Or conspiracy theorists and all that. I said, you're right. So I said, we kicked off the book by saying, let us show you just to what point we, the authors, and we, the people in this room, most of us, are much closer to the official record than those who continue to parrot the Warren Commission result. And that basically what we did there is we got primary evidence. Now, only primary evidence is what? We're talking about insiders. Now, who are the insiders? Those who participated in investigations. There were 6 government investigations. So these investigations had people, right, that had subpoena power, lawyers. You had the heads of commissions. You had, police officers, the physicians, and so on and so forth. What did they say? And what did the reports actually say? Let me just quote something for you in that chapter that comes from the Church Committee. The Church Committee is the organization that was set up after Watergate, and they looked into this subcommittee headed by Schweiker and Hart, co-chaired by these two, looked into how did the intelligence agencies and the Warren Commission do their job in terms of investigating the Kennedy assassination. That's in effect what their responsibility was. Now, the Church Committee conclusion developed evidence which impeaches the process by which the intelligence agencies arrived at their own conclusions about the assassination, and by which they provided information to the Warren Commission. This evidence indicates that the investigation of the assassination was deficient. Now, the next thing we say is the HSCA, they concur. Now, let's go a bit further. Richard Schweiker, I'm going to give you a quote, to the best of my recollection, is on the BBC documentary. Schweiker, again, a U.S. Republican senator who's co-chairing this committee. He says, now, hold your breath. The Warren Commission has in fact collapsed like a house of cards. And I believe it was put in place to feed pablum to the American people.
Wow.
Does it get any worse than that?
No.
And now, in that chapter, we have 90. I mean, look, things that even Hoover said, and even Gerald Ford said to the French president, Gerald Ford being one of the biggest apologists ever. Well, what he would say in secret was different. And and it goes on and on and on. So now get to Siebert and O'Neill. I think they're two of the most important witnesses in the whole case. These are FBI officers. And they say, there's no way I will buy this single bullet theory. The hole in the back was too low. You can't put enough sugar on this for me to swallow it. I mean, again, some people say, well, are you taking that out of context?
How could you?
I mean, that'd be out of context. You can't get anything. And then there was the declassification, of the doctor's drawings of the back of the head wounds.
Right.
I mean, when you read the book, you'll go and see that. So that's, I think, absolutely fascinating, some of the stuff in there. And what I think that did is it set the tone for the next 8 chapters or 9 chapters. We
Right.
were able to surf on the credibility that we gained from the first one. Because, again, anybody who reads that, well, the movie OC really would have to be calling Schweiker and Hart a quack, and Sprague and Tannenbaum and Cooper, Russell. These are all quacks, according to the Warren Commission apologists.
Right.
And it doesn't work.
And another thing, getting back to Schweiker, he also said about Oswald has the if you look at him, he has the fingerprints of intelligence all over him.
You're absolutely right. And I think he even says he was hobnobbing with pro-Castro agents and anti-Castro. He says that smacks of a role as a double agent.
Yep, exactly.
So you're absolutely right, Sean.
So the second one, you have the second chokehold we're going through here, Oswald's intelligence connections. And of course, Professor, we talked a lot about the Oswald's 201 file, and we talked a lot last time you're on about 544 Camp Street. But let's talk about the Oswald, the phone call he made to North Carolina, because that's an intelligence connection.
Yes. I'm going to go on memory here. So poor Oswald doesn't have a lawyer. He initially, when he was captured, arrested, he was sort of confident at first, and then after a while, I think it dawned on him that he's being set up. So at first, his requests were to have a lawyer present, John Apt, but later he wasn't getting any help. He didn't have any lawyers, so he said he made a phone call. And the phone calls were listened into by Secret Service agents, and they were they never got through the phone calls. But 2 of the staffers, 2 secretaries, who were handling the call, in other words, were making the connection, had to write down the number. And one of the people took the phone number, one of the 2 ladies, out of the waste paper basket. And that phone number corresponds to a CIA connected guy. I think it's in North Carolina, and his name is Hurt. Is it
John Hurt? I
John
believe
Hurt,
it was Nags Head, North Carolina.
Nags Head, North Carolina. Thank you, Sean. So and when people looked at that, the only interpretation you had was he's trying to call the person he doesn't want to talk too much to not blow his cover, okay, as a CIA asset or pawn or whatever you want to call it, and he's not getting through. But that this person, nobody could figure out what a guy in Dallas, okay, a 23 or just turned 24-year-old, is trying to call this Hurt fella. And the only way you can interpret it is that he wanted someone to make the phone call to get him released or out of trouble. So that even Robert Blakey called very troubling. Robert Blakey by then was heading the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And so that is in the book. And it's another, so what we did in that, go on.
Well, I'm just going to say, that's smacks of a CIA operation. What they would call a cutout would be what John Hurt would be.
Yes, that's the word I was looking for, actually. And in that chapter, we describe, Oswald, what he owned. We talked about
the camera,
the Minex camera. He had a notebook with the word microdot in it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He had a box stop, a box stop that is usually used to maybe connect with, you use as a connection when you go into a theater to connect with someone. you don't know. Okay, so he had a whole bunch of possessions. And then if you looked at his world, his universe, how many 24-year-olds have a universe where we go over 60 to 70 people who had plausible CIA connections,
Right.
30 of which are definite. 30 of which, okay, like the Morning Shield, the Cuban exiles in New Orleans, they were all being run under either the DRE and they were being funded by the very guy, Joanides, was handling the DRE. Yeah, he's handling this gang, and he's the one who's obfuscating the HSCA report. They brought him in to hide everything.
Right.
So you have this. How many? So this loner has so many touch points with intelligence that it completely destroys the persona of a lone nut.
Absolutely. And you also mentioned how when Oswald was young, he wasn't into communism. He was into, spy shows, and he watched that show. What was it? I Led Three Lives, and reading James Bond novels. And that's what Oswald was obsessed with, becoming a spy.
Yeah. And all the communist reading he's doing, it's so that he can become a better spy.
Yeah.
Right. That's why he's reading it. And that's why you want to learn Russian. Right. It's not to espouse Stalin. It's because you want to be set up and have the bona fides to be able to go into Russia. Just like when he joined the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, when he was in New Orleans, this was to set him up so that if he wanted to enter Cuba, he could use that as, one of his benchmarks or one of his points. And he did. When he went to Mexico City, or allegedly went to Mexico City, that's what he, all these people that were part of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee who wanted to go to Cuba. And it worked at first, they would say, hey, I'm part of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Let me in. I'm one of your friends.
And another thing you mentioned in there was Pete Bagley, the CIA guy who said that Oswald was a willing defector when he defected to the Soviet Union.
Yes, he made that incredible admission to, I think, Malcolm Blunt.
Right, it was.
John Newman has a lot about that, because Peter Bagley was a very important person in figuring out, he was involved in this Nozienko affair,
right?
And who Nozienko, who was a Russian defector, but was more likely a false defector, and Bagley, he had an awful lot of doubts around why Oswald would have defected and all that. So that's why those who are really studying the angle that Oswald, what was his mission really when he went into Russia? He probably didn't even know how he was being used. But according to John Newman, he was sent in there as sort of a marked card, that the people who would be asking questions about Oswald, since they had to go through the Office of Security file and not the Soviet Russia division, it would have indicated that someone in Russia was telling it, can you get me information on this guy? So that was the whole angle that Newman, and I'm giving it in a very simplistic way, but that's the importance of what Peter Bagley said. And again, that's a high level intelligence person.
Right. He was in the Soviet Russian division, right? He was high up in that division of the CIA.
I think so, because he was involved certainly in recruiting defectors when he was in Europe. So I don't recall his exact title, but that would make sense.
And Professor, one interesting thing, talking about the false defector program, I believe I read before that Navy intelligence was running the false defector program out of Nags Head, North Carolina, right where Oswald made that call to John Hurd.
There's I'm not sure how solidly that was how solid what kind of foundation that is, but I've heard that also, and I think it might make an awful lot of sense, because there's stuff that I'm not at a point that we didn't put it in the book, because say, okay, well, we'll need more corroboration on that. We don't want to be taken down because of something that's a little bit too speculative.
Right.
I'm not saying that is, but that's how careful.
Oh, I agree. And in the book, you also made a comparison with real defectors versus Oswald. And that really shows. I mean, it shows you how the real defectors were really under microscope, and Oswald was allowed to come and go as he pleased.
Oh yeah, because there's two people, and they're still in Europe, and in Russia right now. They're still alive. One of them would like to go to Canada or back to the U.S. One of them, his name is Martin, something Martin. I forget the other one. But the guy who studied the investigation that was made when these two defected, apparently it went on for years. They were trying to, figure out the damage control. They were talking to everyone. The people who were questioned when Oswald went over, some of them claim that that it was all, how could I put it, done on the surface with very little depth, and that they were only lobbing softballs. Like, they didn't even want to get into what he could have, his whole U2 plane experience. Because for your audience, Oswald, when he was in Japan, was on a base of U2 spy planes, and he was a radar operator. So that's what made him an incredibly good lure to flush out them all, because the Russians absolutely hated the U2. They, for a long time, they couldn't do anything about it because it was so high flying. And that was one of the best American methods of gaining information on what was going on in terms of troop movements, nuclear facilities, and so on and so forth. So that's why you would get someone like Oswald going in there and threatening to leak secrets. There would have been interest, because, and then one of the pilots of a U-2 gets shot down while Oswald's in Russia, Powers. And Powers always thought that Oswald had something to do with that. Anyway, so I think that that chapter, right, is called Oswald's Intelligence Connections.
Right.
And it's, I think, overwhelming. And you, in your last episode, when I tried to make a link of one key person, when you interviewed me the last time, was David Atlee Phillips. He alone has something like 15 to 20 common touch points with Oswald.
Right.
I mean, that's crazy also.
Absolutely. And then let's move on to another chokehold. Was Oswald was impersonated. And of course, we talked about Mexico City, before in a podcast, there's Oswald was impersonated there. But you mentioned so many different ones in the book, even one that I wasn't aware of, Professor. There was a couple here. Just, I mean, it's so overwhelming how many times Oswald was impersonated that, there's no way anybody could say this is a lone gunman. Why would a lone gunman be impersonated this many times? But you gave so many examples in the book, from the Ralph Yates, the hitchhiker, there's just, I could go on and on, the Redbird Airfield. I mean, wherever you want to go, you could just discuss.
Well, I'll take one that I found extremely compelling, and it was compelling because so many people saw him. Now, just before we start on this, one might argue that, well, maybe that was the real him. He wasn't being impersonated. Well, it's often the Warren Commission that says, they would always say when they had a troubling sighting of Oswald, well, that can't have been right, because Oswald was known to have been at such a place. So they did dismiss a testimony altogether, and they would do that all the time. The one that was most, I find interesting for me, other than Mexico City, was when he's shooting at the sports drone. And normally you would think that this would have pleased the plotters, because one of the biggest things about Oswald is his shooting competence was seriously questioned. He was low-level sharpshooter in the Marines during one test, and then when he left, he barely made marksman. And if you can't make marksman, you can't be a soldier, just about. So he leaves. Then he's described as a lousy hunter in Russia. But then the next thing, and this is in the book also, so this is something very few people knew, and even at Lancer. Did you know that Oswald was evaluated for shooting competencies while he was in Russia? In other words, he shot at targets, and there's a file that says the Russians say he wasn't any good. Okay, so anyway, that's why it was important for the Warren Commission to say this guy was practicing, because I used to shoot, do target practice, and if you don't shoot for a few years, your aim and your technique, doesn't come back from day one. There, it's like playing golf. There, you're not going to stop playing golf and come back 3 or 4 years later and win the PGA. There's no way. So this guy, Oswald, it was important to place him at shooting ranges. And that's what the sports drone would have done. It would have said, hey, he was there 3 or 4 times. But you see, the thing is he was seen by 7 or 8 people. And he was acting unhinged. He's firing at other people's targets, ruining their experience. Because when you hit someone else's target, you don't know whether it's your bullet or someone else's bullet. It drives you nuts, okay? And he's doing that to make himself noticed. But you know what the problem was? You know why that had to go away? He was accompanied by 2 Latinos, and one of them was dressed like Castro. He was sporting a beard, and he himself was acting like a pain in the neck to get noticed. And the idea there was to say because at first the idea was to blame everything on Castro. But when you want to go the lone nut route, you can't have an Oswald.
You can't have that,
even if it's doing something, with people like that.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
It's amazing.
You wanted to go into because this is I'm familiar with this story, but I don't think Bill is, but the Robert Vincent story on the seaplane.
Oh yeah. I actually ordered his book.
It's a fascinating story.
It is, where I first read about it was in JFK and the Unspeakable. And I think Jim Douglas wrote a fantastic book there.
That's a great book.
Oh yeah, it is. So what happened there is, after Oswald was arrested, at the Texas theater, there were sightings of an Oswald. At first, it was at a gas station where someone saw him in the back seat of a car, certainly an Oswald lookalike. There were rumors that an Oswald had been arrested in the balcony and brought out the back of the theater. But the one where he was seen in the car, the person who saw him took the license plate number. And the license plate number links up to Collins Radio. Okay, Collins Radio being a major supplier of the CIA.
Right.
And Wes, there are links in there that are absolutely amazing. But fast forward a bit more, is this Vincent fellow who did work. Okay, this is corroborated. He did do some work for the CIA. He had to get back to Colorado, and he hopped on a CIA plane. I think it was leaving Washington, or it was the Northeast.
Right.
And they said, okay, well, we can get you. So he's almost, I think he's a lone passenger on this plane. And they stop off in Dallas. And they pick up the Oswald lookalike with a Latino. And they kind of march past this guy, give him a weird stare. And next thing you know, they sit, and there's not a word being said. And they stop in New Mexico on his way back to Colorado. So it's a long flight for this poor guy. But he, you know, his story was picked up. So he eventually started talking about it. And the guy who wrote a book for him was a lawyer. And he says, well, I have to corroborate your flight. Okay. And he did. He says that flight did occur. And he had to corroborate his, his job history. And he did.
Wow.
So what the person said is corroborated. And, he's very convinced that that the person that got on the plane was an Oswald or an Oswald lookalike.
But of course, it couldn't have been the Oswald, Professor. The Oswald we know is currently at that time was already arrested in Dallas police station.
Yes,
exactly.
And
that was
it happened.
And also that was Roswell Air Force Base that they dropped them off at, the seaplane.
Yes.
So
yes,
I'm trying to understand this. Does that mean that there were backup Oswalds just in case? Is that what the implication is?
That there's okay. The usually the Oswald, the Oswald lookalikes, okay, before the assassination, were being used to make Oswald look unhinged and pro-Castro.
Right.
That was if you look at the behavior, when he goes to Mexico City, what does he do? He meets Kostakov. Kostakov is who? In the Russian embassy or consulate. He's the person in Russia, the Russian agent in charge of assassinations in the Western Hemisphere. So that contact is almost like, here's where he got his orders, right? Then there were rumors that he was receiving money from agents. Your question's a really good one. Why would we see during the assassination, at one point, Roger Craig saying an Oswald run down towards a Rambler, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have an Oswald in the balcony. My answer to that is maybe there's some of these sightings that was just a mix-up. It wasn't what people thought they were, but the overwhelming thing was that they did occur. The why, I can only speculate about. You see, Oswald, right? If they had to admit the shot was from the front, well, then maybe the Oswald in the sixth floor may never have existed, and it could have been that Oswald running down to the Rambler. Wow. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. I can't give you an answer.
Guys, the one thing I take out of this whole thing, though, is to me, all this impersonations and stuff, it speaks to me that this is not the mafia. This is not the Ku Klux Klan. No. This is not a lone gunman. I mean, this is an intelligence operation. Sure. I mean, I think that's very clear. And the people trying to look down these other rabbit holes they're going down a hole. They're just going to get lost. That leads nowhere.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And what is clear, though, is that you can see that the preliminary agenda was to blame the Kennedy assassination on Castro.
Right. And we know Johnson goes in the opposite direction because he's afraid of World War III.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's afraid not just of World War III, Sean. There's two things. He says that, and he says that to get the Warren involved and to get people to play ball on a lone nut, because he actually tells Warren that if I told you what happened in Mexico City, we might have 40 million people killed, and we might be into World War III. He says that. On the other hand, did he have pre-knowledge and know that, wait a minute, a real investigation would have shown that Oswald was an informant, that Ruby was an informant, that more people involved, and it was an internal job, and would it have been a stink bomb for some of the institutions in the U.S.?
That's true.
So
and also, Professor, he also was told by Hoover that that the Oswald they had in Mexico City, the tapes, the voice doesn't match the Oswald that they had in custody. So he could
Absolutely.
also be thinking, this could be a CIA operation. He could have thought that as well, and I don't want to go down that angle.
Oh, absolutely. And and think of it too. He may have known because, there's a, Oswald, when he had been arrested in New Orleans, who did he call? The FBI. He
Right.
was, he was arrested, and he spends an hour and a half to 3 hours with a guy called Quigley, an FBI agent who's going there for a minor street disturbance. More likely, he was informing on his Fair Play for Cuba committee activities, because the guy he wanted to talk to was Warren DeBreeze, and Warren
Right.
DeBreeze was in charge of overseeing Fair Play for Cuba committee activity in New Orleans. Okay, so how? And then look at Hosty. The note he brings Hosty. So if Hoover had to try and explain away the note, Oswald's relations with DeBreeze or Quigley, then you would have had people saying, well, wait a minute, do we believe you? There's got to be more to this than just that.
Right.
So there's a lot of contamination that happened to some of these institutions beforehand. And even, like, I'm not saying the FBI was involved in the plot to kill
Right.
Kennedy. I'm not even saying the CIA was. I'm not sure that, but the people who were, and some of them I think may have been role players within the CIA, or because we often talk about Alan Dulles and Cabell and all that. We have to keep in mind that Dulles had been let go. He
Right.
hadn't been there
He's
for a year.
outside.
I'm not sure that John McCone. Yeah, so I think that there was a whole aspect there that's saying, oh boy, whoever planned this knew that a lot of people would take a hit if they had to go down.
And that seems like the perfect plan, and that goes a lot to Angleton controlling Oswald's file, and the whole meeting in Mexico City. If John Newman called that a virus, the meeting with Kostakov, who ended up being Department 13. I mean, once that came out, every agency that ever had contact with Oswald, was going to cover their own ass, and they.
Oh, absolutely. It mustn't have been hard to get them to play ball.
No,
Probably where you had trouble were like with people like Seibert and O'Neill, like Seibert and O'Neill. You may have these long time people that have pride and you do their job, and they're going to write a report. Maybe the message didn't get down to Seibert and O'Neill changing the report. What happened is Spectre did not depose them, and they didn't present their report. Their report isn't part of the Warren Commission, and it most certainly should have been.
Right.
So that's how they controlled that, So it was just a mess.
Well, let's the fourth one. We already talked about this Oswald not being on the sixth floor. I mean, we had episodes on this.
Yeah.
And of course, you go into the girls on the stairs and everything, and prove that Oswald couldn't be there. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
No, I just think that Matt Crompton, who wrote that chapter, did a wonderful job.
Oh, absolutely.
He did a wonderful job of showing how the witnesses who place him there are terrible witnesses and not credible, and how the number of witnesses, and if you mix that with what Bart Camp is finding about certain photographic evidence, I think Bart Camp is onto something.
Is that the prayer man picture?
Yeah, well, he presented today at Lancer, and one thing I wasn't aware of is, the Coke bottle?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can see a lunch bag and a Coke bottle on the steps.
Oh.
Okay, where you can see them, and he shows them. Anyway, that's corroborative. Is it a smoking gun, or is it he's still working on that? And the other thing he did is, I mean, think of this again. There are no transcripts or taped recordings of Oswald's interrogations.
Unbelievable.
So it's just a bunch of loose, it's loose pieces. But Bart Camp got all the different elements that gives a pretty good picture of what was really said versus what was claimed to have been said. And he presented that today. And look, I'm not going to say Prayer Man is Oswald until we can make him out in a picture. But more and more people are not shying away from that as much as they used to.
Right.
And so I'm not there yet. We didn't put that in our book, but yeah. So anyway, that chapter in itself is extremely interesting for the way a lawyer would attack it.
Right. Absolutely. So the next one, you have the next chokehold is Ruby on a Mission. And this was a fascinating chapter because there's no way you could say, that Ruby was another lone gunman, taking out a lone gunman. And I mean, it's just ridiculous.
It's insane, is what it is. I mean, even today, people that operate strip joints, there are probably a number of them that, have some relations with steady characters, right? So this guy's a strip joint owner, and if you believe the Warren Commission, it was his grief that brought him to kill Oswald, and he's wanting to spare Jackie Kennedy of all this insane stuff. But
Right.
that's what they had to go with. But what we put together was stuff that came mostly from the HSCA, and that is that clearly Ruby, with his friend Louis McWillie, who was organized himself to meet Santos Traficante while Traficante was in a Cuban jail. So Ruby wanted to be a made guy, wanted to be a big shot, said, hey, I'm going to be the guy who gets this, this mafioso star character out of jail. And he goes there, and there are witnesses, and the HSCA says they are inclined to believe the witnesses that a meeting had taken place. So you start off with that, okay? Then you do is you look at the phone calls that he made that were analyzed and the meetings that he had leading up to the assassination. Again, he's talking to hitmen. He's talking to mafiosi, and the HSCA is clear about that. It's clear about that. And then you go into the weekend of the assassination, and the Warren Commission did not believe Seth Cantor, who was a well-respected journalist at Parkland Hospital, who said he bumped into Ruby. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, the HSCA said, well, we're inclined to believe him. Okay. And then next thing you know, he's seen 4 or 5 times in the building where Oswald was being held on floors he had no business being.
Right.
So at the end of the day, you have this guy, and then he himself made certain quasi confessions and all that. And when you put it all together, the first people, that's what I was telling you. In Europe, you get terrible security on the day that Kennedy was assassinated, and even the Warren Commission says that. Then the most important witness gets the worst security on the day he gets assassinated 2 days later by a mob-connected guy. Give me a break. I think that when you read that, you can't come to a conclusion other than Ruby sealed the most important witness's lips.
Right. And of course, you mentioned Traficante, who the CIA went to assassinate Castro.
Yeah, I forgot to bring that up. Thank you, because for your listeners, that is supremely important. What are the odds? What are the odds? And by the way, Traficante links a lot of people in Oswald's neck of the woods. I mean, I'm talking about Bernard Parker, John Martino. These are Cubans, exiles, some of whom had worked for Traficante or networked with Traficante, because Traficante was a major heroin smuggler, and the heroin would transit through Cuba, right, and go to the U.S. And he also had casino activities with Mayor Lansky and all that. So he was extremely connected with the Cuban exiles. And that's why the CIA chose him, because they figured that some of these mafiosi still had contacts on the island that could do hit jobs. And so they met with Trafficante and tried to, organize the assassination of Castro.
And of course, and another thing you point out in the book that's so clear is, Ruby's connections inside the Dallas Police Department. I mean, he was so cop friendly.
Yes. Oh, yes. The estimates vary, but if there was, I don't know, 400 police officers, they claimed that he had relations with over half of them. I mean, he was bringing them sandwiches, imagine, of all things, on the day of the assassination and the following days. And I forgot to mention this. You can see this on YouTube. If you look hard enough, you will find Jack Ruby at a press conference held by the Attorney General Henry Wade. Right. And Henry Wade is making a statement, and he says that Oswald was part of the Free Cuba Committee.
Right.
And he's corrected. He is corrected.
By
Ruby. Ruby says, no, that would be the Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
That was in the movie, right? It was
in the movie. Yeah. And the other thing about that, though, Professor, is, how would Ruby, Ruby knows the name of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. That, not a lot of people would know that. Shows that Ruby had a lot of connections inside with the Cubans as well. But that's unbelievable. That whole sequence is just unbelievable.
Oh, that's, it's his fourth or fifth time there, and he's walking around. He's got a gun.
Right, he's stalking him.
He's stalking him. He is stalking him. And he likely made a phone call the day before he shot him to the Dallas Police Department to say, hey, we're going to kill your guy. He's likely the guy who made that. I think. I would bet it. We didn't put it in the book, but the DPD got a phone call. And what is that? That's Ruby, trying to be able to say, hey, guys, I would have done it, but, they decided they weren't going to move him. You know what I mean?
He's trying to get out of it.
He's trying to sabotage his thing, I think, because, your days are counted. If you can't do something like that and not worry about the circumstances. There's a lot of things that can go wrong.
Absolutely.
Unbelievable.
Well, the next chokehold, we talked a lot when you were on last time, the prior plots, the FPCC, and you talked a lot about that. So we can move on unless there's something you want to add.
Well, no, just maybe conclude that what I think we have many similar cases. Normally you would do a similar case analysis in a murder, any murder, especially the president's murder. They didn't do any. And the readers will see incredible similar cases where you would have been able to say, hey, there's a template here.
Right.
There's a template because potential patsies, they're all lookalike. I mean, not lookalikes, but they're all similar. And the key thing, again, if imagine you could solve this case if you solved who organized the attempt in Chicago, or the attempt or the plan. Even if there was an attempt, maybe the plan. So there are many vectors that could have led to figuring out, because similar case analysis is an offender profiling technique. So you look at series of crimes and say, oh, these things come up. And the key thing that came up all the time with many of these potential patsies is this incredibly rare relationship with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. That's just one. But I mean, they were ex-Marines. They tried to go to Mexico. There's a template. And the template would in each case say, hey, Oswald's network is behind this. He's the one who did it. So we have our excuse. That's what I would say about that chapter.
And if you haven't, just real quick, Sean, if you haven't heard the episode where, Professor Bleau was on with us for the first time, Go back and listen to that. It was back, I believe, in August of this year, 2023. And a fantastic episode. I highly recommend, if you know, again, if you haven't heard it, go back and listen to it, because you were great with us the first time, Professor. And we certainly appreciated that. And just as you are again today, this is some incredible material.
Yeah, and you know what I forgot to mention, a lot of the stuff we're talking about, we've done episodes on these. Last year in November, we did a whole month of JFK stuff, so people could go back and hear a lot of these episodes where we covered a lot of the stuff about Mexico City and Oswald's 201 file and the girls on the stairs and a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, episodes that Jim was with us for.
Yeah, Jim was on. You're right.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of Jim's stuff, because you talk about primary evidence, his documentary with Oliver Stone is based on mostly primary evidence.
Right.
So, and I highly recommend the book version, because I didn't know this. The first half of the book are the transcripts of the documentary. So that for me wasn't as interesting. But when I got into the long version interviews of the people, like he had about 30 experts, you read what some of these people say, like Doug Horn and others, it's unbelievable. And a lot of that made its way into our book, thank God, because I don't think many people would have necessarily found it if they had already seen the documentary. Is when you were in that documentary, you could have been interviewed for 5 minutes, but I have a 5-minute scene, but I was interviewed for 50 minutes.
Right.
And I assume it was the same thing, every specialist. And there are hidden gems in what's not in the documentary.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And that book is up on our bookshop too. I recommend that for everybody. JFK Revisited. So the next chokehold is called The Evidentiary Mess of the 20th Century. Wherever you want to go with this one, Professor, because this was a fascinating chapter. I know the brain stuff is just unbelievable.
Oh,
if you want to do that.
Oh, sure. I'll just mention a few highlights, because a lot of people know about the messed up autopsy. Okay. You know who came up with that line? Calling it the evidentiary mess of the 20th century?
No.
I'm pretty sure it was Doug Horn. If it wasn't Jeremy Gunn, or was it John? Anyway, one of the big three of the ARB. In the book, I'm just having a memory blank, but that's what they called it. Now, start off with that. If you screw up an autopsy, and how did they screw it up? They didn't even do trajectory analysis. They didn't dissect the brain. They didn't dissect the wounds. So you couldn't connect the wound in the back with the throat because they didn't do it. Right? There's no trajectory analysis. And then, of course, the brains, they didn't examine the organs. It was one, and the people who conducted it had no experience in gunshot wounds, or very, very little. Let's put it that way. So there's some amazing things there too. What Jim found was that, the unbelievably, what happened to Kennedy's brain is a huge mystery. But one thing that was uncovered is there were samples of his brain that were kept and, were in laboratories. And unbelievably, one of the technicians or the researchers, they said, well, what do we do with this brain sample? I don't know what year it was in, but they actually decided, to completely destroy it. I mean, they obliterated it like you would for a corpse, and they put it through a blender and got rid of it that way. More pertinent to the mess is all the things that went wrong. I think what I'll do with that one, Jim wrote it well. I would just suggest that to your audience that to mess up as much as they did there, and to have so many admirals and generals involved in hampering the actual autopsy and giving orders, and then, burning your notes, your autopsy notes, which could have been used as primary evidence. The autopsy notes are more valuable than the transcripts because they're closer to what you observe, right? So all of that is in there. And that's why, when you talk about an evidentiary method. And the other thing too, is it relates. I think what I'll do is I'll mix this with the proof of the front shot. It is definite that the photos of the brain, Kennedy's brain, that are at the archives are not of his brain. That is definite.
Right.
And, they came up with this thing whereby his brain supposedly weighed 1,500 grams, right? The average brain weighs 1,350 grams.
Impossible.
The dead Kennedy's brain had cerebellum and parts of it blown all over the place.
Right.
And many people had observed how damaged that brain was. And the other thing that Doug Horn pointed out is that the brain, the pictures of the brain he was shown, and the people who describe it say, no, that brain was, I forget the name, the fluid they put it in to preserve it. Okay, the brain. Depending on the color of the brain, you can see how long it was it had been conserved for. And the people who saw it was supposed to be only a few days after Kennedy's death, said, no, the brain we were looking at had been preserved for at least 3 weeks.
Wow.
Because it's more of a pinkish color, I think, and then it sort of transitions into a grayish color after a few weeks. Anyway, that's my understanding. It's a fascinating chapter.
Boy, if nothing else, it's gross incompetence. At the very least, the fact that the autopsy was botched in such a way.
There's a reason they hid all the photos and the notes were being burned, and the amazing picture in that book. You'll see a picture that was used by Bugliosi, I believe, to say, because all this information about how the Bethesda doctors and the Parkland doctors really agree, because they made drawings showing the back of the head wound from both places. And Seibert made a drawing, or is it O'Neill? One of the two made a drawing of an egg-shaped hole in the back of the head. So the biggest lie the HSCA made was saying, well, the people at Bethesda disagree with the people at Parkland on the nature of the wound. But now that's debunked, right? So you know what Bugliosi says? Well, we have this picture of the back of Kennedy's head, and you can see the scalp is there. So we can rely on photographs more than we can rely on memory or witness testimony. Oh boy. Well, you'll see that the explanation of why that scalp is in place, you'll see the explanation. And it's the person who gives it is Boswell. He says, no, I'm holding up the scalp. And underneath there, you would see an injury. Okay, so there's no more mystery. You'll see that in the book.
Yeah.
But anybody says, well, that photo debunks anything. I mean, they were throwing Hail Marys there, to save their skins after a while. But even that's explained. So the depths at which they would go to make evidence or change evidence or misrepresent evidence. If you read the Warren Commission, you have to read how they describe the Zapruder film. They don't mention a violent movement from the front to the back. They don't. They just said eventually his head was in Jackie's arms. So it's the most dishonest report you'll ever see.
That's unbelievable. I mean, you would think that, there would be literally a frame by frame description of the Zapruder film in that report.
Oh yeah, because they did do that. In other words, they recreated each frame and blew them up in poster size.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think those frames survived. I think I don't want to be quoted on that, but so if you look also, it's what they did in both the Warren Commission report and the Life magazine, who showed the frames.
Mm-hmm.
They changed the sequence of a few frames to make it look like Kennedy's head first went backward. And even Hoover says, "Oh yeah, shucks, sorry, that was a mistake."
Oh my God.
No, it's unbelievable.
Oh, fascinating. Fascinating. Sean, what else? What else we got?
We already covered the proof of the front shot. So we got two more. I know we're taking up a lot of your time here, Professor, but
No, keep going, keep going.
Two more left. We got the single bullet fabrication. And, the one thing about that is, ties into something that came out recently was the Robert Landis, the Secret Service agent, says that he found this bullet, and he came out with this whole story. And now nobody's really looked into it enough to say that, the story is true. But the thing that gets me is I remember when this first came out, Bill told me about it. And then I was seeing some things on the news, and they had Jake Tapper on CNN, and he was telling this whole story, and he had Landis on. And then he goes on and he goes, but it doesn't really change anything as far as whether Oswald is guilty or not. And I'm thinking, my God, this is how out of touch some of these people in the mainstream media are. Like if Landis' story checks out, it changes everything. The magic bullet theory is destroyed once and for all.
Oh yeah. Well, look, I think it was dead on arrival.
Sure.
We didn't need that. That before Landis said there was a bullet in the back, another one said that, and that was the other White House physician, a guy called, I think it's James Young. It's Young anyway. Young was a younger guy, and he went to he went to Bethesda because he figured that Berkeley had been there and that he should be there to maybe replace him or support anyway. So he asked two of his aides, or a guy, I think one guy's name was Martinell, anyway, to go down and pick up the debris in the limousine. And they came up with some matters, including a bullet. Okay, so the first evidence of a bullet that was in the back. So the Landis bullet, if true, is the second one. It's not the first one. So that bullet was that whole thing. Young, after a while, he wrote, Gerald Ford says, "Hey, what about that bullet that I made available to the Warren Commission? I don't seem to have heard or know anything about it." I'm just paraphrasing here. And Ford just deviated. He just deviated. But that Landis, what's interesting is I haven't read his book. He did present last few days in Pittsburgh. So I'm going to get some news from the other authors about that. But I find what he says to be more credible than the single bullet theory. So we talk about Landis, but we're not far from dependent on what he says to destroy the single. Because the single bullet, look, for your audience, the entry point for the bullet, it's going down. Okay, it's headed downwards. Whether it's 20 degrees or 45 degrees or whatever it is, it's going in a downward direction. The first slope that we were given was 45 degrees, I believe. But even the HSCA says, and then it had to go up 12 degrees, I believe, to enter from the throat. Okay, because they discarded Gerald Ford's location of the hole in the back. But then it has to come back down again to cause Connolly's wounds. So the trajectory, whether it's from left to right or from top to bottom, does not work. It just doesn't work. The second thing that really doesn't work is there was to that bullet.
Their own witness could debunk that.
Yes, Dulce, okay,
Dulce,
who was really
the field medic.
Okay, and he fired something like 100 bullets through cadavers, and he says, every single one of them saw the tip completely
Smashed.
crushed, smashed. Nothing looked like that one. And this is a bullet that not only broke a huge wrist in Connolly, but his rib. So, and not to mention the 5 other wounds. So that doesn't work. Then the witness testimony is crazy there too. I mean, the doctors clearly said the throat wound was a wound of entry.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So now, getting to Landis, where I was happy is the press took it seriously enough to not ridicule him.
Right.
But notice how they didn't go the extra step to say, well, if he's right, what does this mean?
No.
They didn't go the extra step to say, what does this mean? And that it will be left up to people, I think, like you. And yesterday I was on another great podcast for Australia and Black Hawk Radio and I think there's more and more of that. We're really happy with the coverage we're getting so far, but I'll leave that for later.
Well, the last chapter is called 60 Years of Obstruction of Justice. And this was a great chapter because it kind of shows you, if you look at who was manipulating and destroying every single investigation into the Kennedy assassination, and it kind of could lead you towards the suspects if you look at who was actually tampering with all these investigations.
Yeah, Jim was telling me, because we get the stories of obstruction in bits and pieces, and every single investigation was a target of obstruction. Everyone. And everyone. You take the Warren Commission. What did they do? They sent off their their pit bull in what's his name, Moore. I'm trying to think of the one who intimidated the doctors.
Oh yeah, Moore. Yeah.
Yeah, Moore. And then they destroyed some of the evidence, and they mischaracterized some. So we have primary evidence that shows case by case. Even not many people are aware of the Rockefeller Commission investigation into the case. I mean, that in its own was a farce because it was organized by General Gerald Ford, who was president at the time, and he put David Bellin of the Warren Commission in charge of managing it. But what I found interesting with that one is when it came time to reread and sanitize the report. I don't know, Sean, if you remember who did it. But it was Dick Cheney.
Oh yeah, okay.
I mean, Dick Cheney sanitized the report. Kissinger, one person wanted to hold a press conference. Kissinger says, you're not holding that press conference. There's so much. And then, look, Garrison, it is clear that his office was bugged and that there was a team made at the CIA called, I think, the Garrison team or something.
The Get Garrison Group like or something. The Garrison Group.
The Get Garrison. Yeah, that would make sense.
Group, yeah.
And yeah. Oh, yeah. And then, but the thing is we take it. ARRB. Look, we tell the story of Terry Pike in there. Terry Pike was the liaison for declassification of ONI files for the ARB. And she was doing a good job. But she was just railroaded out and destroyed by the Office of Naval Intelligence. And the ARB was furious with that because this woman was doing what she was supposed to do. And then when it came time to get stuff from the Secret Service, all the files that would have revealed so much on prior attempts to kill Kennedy, they were destroyed. And the ARB noted that in their report. Okay, and Samoluk is clear about it in the Oliver Stone documentary. And then you go all the way up to today. What's happening? All the files were supposed to be declassified by 2017. And both Trump and Biden broke the law. And now Biden, they've pretty well erased the law because they say, well, we're not going to abide by the act, but please, everybody, give us a transparency plan. Like to release what's not released. And it's a long chapter. It's like 60 or 70 pages out of the 400. But that's how much obstruction there was.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And of course, even at the Warren Commission, you have Dulles there on the Warren Commission, which is a farce to just have him on it in any capacity. You had Helms at with the Get Garrison group. You had Joanides at the House Assassination Committee, distracting that. And of course, they also pushed out. They made sure Sprague and Tannenbaum were pushed out. So, and then the ARB, they blocked. The intelligence community is the ones blocking everything, whether it's the CIA, the Navy intelligence. So at some point, you have to ask, who's really deflecting all this attention on these investigations, and who's blocking them all? It's not the mafia.
No. It's absolutely terrible. And I think it's well documented. What we put in there, you read them one by one. We know what the naysayers are going to probably do is they're going to take this mountain of facts, because there are 700 footnotes in that book. And there are a lot of exhibits, and it's all primary evidence. We strongly suspect that they're going to try and find a few gray areas around one or two and blow that out of proportion and say, can you believe it? They even brought this up, type of thing.
But discredit the whole.
Discredit on maybe a weak point, a spelling error, who knows? Okay.
Right.
But look, if you read the first chapter, and we put in, by the way, what the intelligence playbook was to counter books like this one or the media or whatnot. Okay. And it's a playbook that is still in play today. And, they're going to say, they were looking for fame. They're married to their own ideas. They want to make money and all that. There's none of that going on with us. It's, this was really done. I mean, this is not our full-time work. So
the labor of love. A labor of love, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I have to admit, though, we're really happy with. You see, the print version started going out on the 14th. Kindle was earlier. So I don't even have a copy of the book. I have what you have, Sean, a PhD, a PDF.
Right.
So that's what I have. But one of the authors told me they started coming in, and there's you feel good when you get something like that. It's done. We're working on a French version and a Spanish version. We think we found the people who can help us convert it into those languages. So that's
great.
That's something else. Also, it was never done. Or I don't know any books really that have been done in many languages. So we hope to get that done.
Well, Professor, it's a tremendous book. I mean, it's really a great book. I recommend it to everybody.
And if nothing else, Professor, it's a book that, where you can say, if any of these things were presented at trial, right? If there was a trial, they would absolutely be cause for reasonable doubt. And, and therefore you couldn't convict him. You couldn't convict Oswald.
No.
Hey guys, you know what? Do you hear the sirens here? I may have to leave. I don't know if they're coming after me.
Oh no!
But they're
oh no!
But they're asking us to leave the building.
Oh boy!
But I'm gonna let you go on. Well, I don't. Seems to have calmed down a bit. It seems to have calmed down. So good. What did I want to say? Sorry, that threw me off. Right?
Wow!
Like, when you're Canadian and you hear sirens in Dallas, you get a little bit jumpy.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, I mean, I think we covered everything we wanted, Professor.
Yeah.
Well, can
Go
I
ahead.
suggest something for
Sure,
you and your?
sure,
If you
absolutely.
want, we have a website. Oh yeah, so we have a website called JFKassassinations.com. Google it, okay, and that will link to our Facebook page. Follow us because we're going to be adding pictures of the weekend. We're going to be adding reactions and information, and keep people informed. Some people may want to send us a question through Facebook. We'll be happy to answer. So we encourage anybody who wants to follow this. And the other thing I would do for your audience, if you can use this book or what we've discussed today to look into the history books that your kids or are reading, go see what it's saying, and challenge the teachers or the authors. It's important that we do that, because if we don't challenge it, there's got to be some sort of shame job done on people who keep, and some of them don't know that they're misleading the students. Some don't. Obviously, I'm not saying, they have so many chapters and facts to cover, but that would be good if your audience could do that.
Absolutely. And everybody just get out and get this book and read it, and it absolutely destroys the Oswald myth that he was a lone gunman and he was responsible. I mean, this book is tremendous.
Yep.
Well, thanks, guys. You guys, by the way, congratulations on your show, and
thank you.
You took the time to read it, and to look into it and ask the smart questions. So it's anytime you want me back, I'll be happy to be on your show.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back.
Maybe at some point, Paul, we'll have you. I'll have you back on to talk a little hockey, maybe, right?
Oh no, because remember, you like New York. Right. You were telling me.
That's right. I'm a Ranger fan.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and we need good goaltending now. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Canadians need a lot of things.
Okay, that'd be great if you want to have Jim on, or two of us, or one of the attorneys at one point.
We'd like to, Professor. We'd like to have everybody on that have contributed his book.
Absolutely.
Jim is actually. We got an episode published up with Jim now, where we're debunking the alleged Kennedy womanizing. And Jim came on and he's debunking a lot of these stories.
I listened to that.
Jim does a great job.
He's fantastic.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
And it's unbelievable what these jackals do, and the dishonesty that they approach this stuff, and trying to they're assassinating Kennedy a second time is what they're doing.
Yep.
Oh, they are.
Yep. All right. Professor Paul Bleau, thank you so much. The book is Chokeholds, that inescapably prove there was a conspiracy, and I don't think there's any question about that at this point. So thank you so much for coming on with us again, and we hope to have you back.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Have a nice end of day. Go watch some football.
All right, will do. Take care.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good night.
Bye-bye. That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane, and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.